Hi there! Thanks so much for being here. Today I'm putting messy and clean card styles head to head using the new Packed with Love collection from Hero Arts. One card is all inky with layers and texture, and the other stays clean and graphic with stamping and die cuts. Same supplies, two totally different vibes. So let's get started and assemble these cards. Let's get started by getting messy first. I'm starting out with a bit of ink smushing. I'm going to put Evergreen Bough Distress ink on my craft mat along with a bit of Hickory Smoke. And last, Uncharted Mariner, just to add in like 3 tones of underwater colors. Then I'm going to mist that with water lightly. Take some watercolor paper and smush that down into my ink. Then I'm going to pick it up and kind of see what happens. It was kind of dry, so I added a bit of water, and then I'm going to use my heat tool to kind of help that ink move and blend. And I'm not really concerned with my first attempt here. We're going to add more colors, especially that evergreen bough. I'm going to add some water to my craft mat and then pick up ink where the evergreen bough looks most concentrated. And that'll layer over on top of what we've already done. I didn't have enough of that evergreen bough on my craft mat, so I'm just going to add some more and then add some water and then layer that over top. The Uncharted Mariner was a bit bold, so I'm trying to pick up some of those lighter colors and adding more of that hickory smoke, and then I'm going to give that a good dry. And now I'm coming in one more time. I like to use my fingers to mix those inks. Since I'm using a craft mat, it creates beads of color. And now I'm just tapping to pick up those beads, and those are going to sit on top of my background that was smushed. So it gives you lots and lots of texture. Now this is a step that some people don't like to do, and I'm going to put in a contrasting color. You could skip it and just stick with that single blue tones, but I like the way that the contrast of the orange kind of comes in, creates a little bit more green, and it just kind of pops for me. It's just something that I like to see. And now I'm going to kind of fill in a little bit with that hickory smoke, not going too crazy, but I do want to kind of deepen some areas, kind of fill in with a bit more gray, and then I'll go around the edges just a little bit. Next, I grab broken china and I'm going to go around the edge even more to create like a vignette effect, kind of deepen the edges, give a little more interest to the background. I also like to pick up some of that wet ink and just kind of rub it over the dots and the splotches. It kind of catches those edges and helps make them pop a bit more against the background. And then one more time, I'm going to tap in some more of those droplets on my craft mat. Again, I'm just building texture and different layers of shapes and colors just to really make it interesting. I let that dry completely. You can use your heat tool or just set it aside so it's dried. Next, I'm using a stencil and I'm just going to apply some texture paste in some like bubbly, like bubbles under the ocean type dots. And I'm using a palette knife and I'm just going to add that texture modeling paste in different thickness. Like it's not completely smooth. Like some areas are a little thicker, some are a little thinner. So it creates variation. That has to dry really well so you can gently heat it with your heat tool or just set it aside and let it dry naturally. Now I'm going to add one more layer of color over those dots, and I'm using a Distress watercolor pencil in Uncharted Mariner. You could just use more of the Distress ink to do this, but the pencils have an opaque look that I like. Just picking that up with some water and my paintbrush and then painting that on kind of in splotchy areas, kind of deepening some of that deep blue, putting it around the edges a little bit, and that's going to kind of fill in the areas and color that modeling paste just a little bit. Now I'm just going to use some water to really help it run and blend a little bit more into that background. This is the fun part of mixed media. You can just do as much or as little as you want and just play around and have fun. And now that I'm done creating this background, I am going to set it aside and just let it dry naturally while I work on the rest of the elements for the card. This is the well-preserved Stamp and Cut stamp set. I picked some of the fish and a sentiment to ink up. And I'm just going to stamp them using the same colors that I used for the card background, so the distress inks. I have some white cardstock in my Misty, and I'm just going to place these where I want to stamp them, and then I'm going to grab some Versamark ink. I like to apply this first, especially to any new stamps, clear stamps that I use, and then I'll apply the ink on top. Especially with distress ink, sometimes it can get a little splotchy, so the Versamark will help kind of smooth that out. So I'm inking those up, and then I'm going to stamp them on my cardstock. Make sure they get nice even pressure so I get a nice impression. So that looks pretty good. Now I'm just going to use the coordinating dies to die cut out those fish. And I did a bunch more fish in different colors so I can kind of fill up my card. Now I'm just going to add some foam tape to the back of my sentiment and then pop that up kind of in the bottom corner of my card. I'm just going to use a ruler here to help keep that panel nice and straight. Now I'm going to start adding some of my die cut elements. Some are popped up with foam tape and some are glued directly down onto the card. Just kind of gives a little bit of dimension and movement to the card. This little anchor was die cut from metallic vellum. It's a really sturdy vellum, and it was in my box 13 from your Paper Insider. So that was the perfect color for that anchor. For my fish, I wanted to make sure I stamped them in each of the colors from the background. So the big fish are the two types of blues and the orange, and then the little fish are all gray. And I wanted to start with the big fish first, and then I'm filling in with the little fish. And I just love how they look like they're swimming underwater, especially with that mixed media background. And that finishes card number 1. For card number 2, we're going to switch gears, and this is going to be more clean and graphic. I'm going to start with the wide stripe bold prints background, and I'm stamping that on some white cardstock, and I'm using some Gina K inks this time. This is Sea Glass. Since it's such a large stamp, I'm pretty sure I'm going to have to do some repeat stamping, especially since I'm using the small cube for inking this up. So I'm doing my best to get a fairly even application of ink, and then I'll give it a good stamp. I want to make sure I have good even pressure, make sure I get the center of that stamp, and then we'll lift it up and see what kind of result we got and if we need to restamp. And it sure looks like we do, so I did actually a couple times. And that's what I really love about having a stamping platform, so you can do repeat stamping and get a nice impression of your stamps. Perfect, so we're just going to set that aside, stamp our sentiment. This is a darker color called Tranquil Teal, and then I'm just going to die cut that out with the coordinating die. Now comes all the fun die cuts that come with the Big Mouth Sardine tin die set. This does have a coordinating mechanism die where it'll slide up and down. I am not using that today, but it would be fun if you want to create an interactive card. I've pre-cut all my die cuts. The tin can comes from that same metallic vellum, and then a bunch of sardines in different teal colors. I just really love those. They're really pretty. And then to me, like, sardines are kind of shiny. So I'm using some Nuvo Crystal Drops in Simply White. They just have a shimmer to them, and I'm applying it to each of the little sardines' bellies. Just add a little bit of shimmer and interest to each of those. Adds just a little bit of interest to each one, and then kind of picks up all the little details in each of the sardines. And I'm just using my finger to apply that. You could use a brush or something if you don't want to use your finger. Perfect, just gonna let those dry. Now I'm going to start assembling my sardine tin can here. I have the base in some white cardstock, and I'm going to cover that with the metallic vellum. That white base actually die cuts out with some tabs on the side so it can work with the mechanism. I just trimmed those off. So that just gives me the base of the tin can. And then I'm going to add a little bit of foam tape to the frame that goes around that centerpiece. I wanted the dimension to feel like the lid and the frame of the tin can is going around those fish. So that's why I'm putting the foam tape just around the frame of the tin can. Next, I'm going to glue in my fish so they're flat. The first layer of fish are flat. I'm gluing them all the same direction, and kind of alternating the different colors. That way when I add the second layer, they won't be sitting right next to each other. So perfect, I have all 3 of my little sardines at the base of my tin can. Now I'm going to pop up the second layer, added some foam tape, and then I'm just going to glue the tails down flat. I don't need that to be popped up because I'm going to add some foam tape on top of those. Next, we'll remove the foam tape and just put our frame in position. Love that. It's really starting to look like a tin can. Now we need our lid. And when I die cut this, I die cut my little pull tab from the top just to save on paper waste. And I'm just going to cut that off because I don't need it. And then I'm going to curl the top back like the pull top had pulled the top of that tin can down. Just going to use a pencil to curl that back, and then I'm going to add some foam tape at the base of the fish, and that will create our lid the same level as the frame, so it looks like we're, opening up the can of fish. Then I'm just going to glue everything down. I put some foam tape, but I'll be honest, after some time, it wasn't strong enough to hold together. So what I ended up doing is just using liquid glue everywhere. So I used liquid glue to glue the pull tab to the flap, to the curled edge, and then I used liquid glue to hold that curl down. You just need a really strong adhesive to make sure it doesn't come undone. The foam tape wasn't strong enough. Last, we're going to add our little sentiment here, birthday fishes, which I think is so punny. I love it. Actually, the people in my family who love to fish are going to love these cards. And here are the finished cards. The first one full of inky techniques, so we get that underwater look with all the pretty little fish swimming around. And then the second card is more clean and graphic and punny, and I love those sardines in their tin can. As always, supplies are listed in the description of this video and at my blog, dahlhouse-designs.com. I hope you enjoyed, and if you did, give this video a thumbs up and subscribe. And I hope to see you again soon for another crafty video. Thanks for being here. Bye.